This event is called Helly, held each January in the Shetland Islands north of Scotland. It's kind of a New Year's celebration, Viking style. Here, the death of the old year is observed by reenacting the death rite of a Viking ship captain. The job requires real dedication. It's January, and these guys are walking through the rain by the ocean near the Arctic Circle, dressed in stainless steel.
The Vikings were initially a pagan warband culture when they first started to attack. In such a society, it's a question of might is right and death and glory. They're not worried about getting in touch with the feminine side of their natures. They were one of the few peoples who didn't have direct contact with the Roman Empire. Rome never invaded Scandinavia. So, in other words, they were almost like a kind of nightmare from the past as far as Christianized Europe was concerned. They sort of exploded out of Scandinavia in the middle to the end of the 8th century and started the guerrilla raids that we all associate with them. Initially, the word Viking isn't a noun, it's a verb. You go Viking. In other words, you go raiding.
Every year, the people of Lerwick construct a life-sized longboat, the Vikings' most terrifying weapon. It was a light craft designed to be moved easily over land.
The dragons' heads were actually detachable.
This way, if they confronted people who were weaker than they were, they'd come on as raiders. But if they came upon someone who was stronger than they were, they'd remove the dragon's head and suddenly decide that they were just traitors. Upon the captain's death, the body was laid out in a roofed grave for 10 days while ceremonial clothes were prepared. But in Viking times, there was a darker side to the last rites of a dying chieftain.
The chieftain had died. The women spent the evening actually sewing a suit of clothes for him. And then the men went among the women, the slave girls, and they asked one to volunteer. No, she wasn't forced. She volunteered to go with him to the other side.
After days of farewells, the slave girl was led to the boat, where she was handed over to give sexual favors to 6 of the men. But the worst was still to come.
The actual death, however, was very, very gruesome. They put a cord around her neck, and a woman called the Angel of Death, this elderly woman, which appears to have been a position, because other Vikings have, in different areas, had Angels of Death. It was like a job description, as it were. She went into the boat, and it appears that she stabbed her several times while the men throttled her. And as the woman was being killed, all the other Viking men stood with their backs to the boat, and they beat their shields so the women, the other women, wouldn't hear the screams of the dying slave girl.
Torches were then fired for the final act of this brutal rite. In the modern Helly, fire represents the return of the sun and of longer days, but it also recalls the final passage of the Viking warrior. The longboat was moved to a resting place filled with the captain's possessions, some herbs, and the butchered remains of livestock. Then a crowd would gather around the ship as the bodies of the captain and the slave girl were laid inside. And the final act would unfold. And the meaning of this elaborate send-off?
Fire festivals were very much part of the sort of Germanic tribes that went across Europe's kind of culture. And it's to do with the rebirth, really. You know, the death of the old year and the birth of the new, hence Helly. A Viking didn't want to die what they called a straw death, an old man asleep in a mattress. He wanted to die with his sword in his hand, which was his passport to Valhalla.